I'd like to say a big hello to all of our listeners, and I'm very happy to share my story today, which is a story that includes the Shaman Xuan Gwar from the Amazon, from Bolivia to be exact. Juan, I'd like to welcome you to Croatia.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Tell me, Juan, you're starting a European tour. Actually, you have started already, and Croatia is one of your stops. Why are you embarking on a European tour? What is it that a shaman from Bolivia can tell to us people from Europe, the average person that lives on the pavement, on the concrete with their busy life? What is it that we can hear from you?
Well, in fact, I have been traveling to Europe before, but I had a new inspiration after recent years, especially COVID. Even though I spent the last 10 years living mostly in nature, it wasn't where I lived first, and I am not a stranger to cities and their problems. When I first arrived to the Amazon and to my teachers, I was quite sick for many things. And in learning how to heal myself and in receiving some traditions and trying to teach others, not teach, but actually heal, I found that if one is convinced about working for Mother Nature, it's not only in the Amazon that we need to do that work. Hello, doggy. But it's also in, it's everywhere.
She wants to be with us. Hey.
Yeah. So I love Europe. I've been coming here for years, and it's I've never come to Croatia. Croatia is wonderful, wonderful place. I feel very connected to it in some ways, very strange. So what we're doing here is just sharing. You know, I think compassion is based on sharing, and sometimes we can over-intellectualize everything, and we have had enough about people trying to teach us how to love. I think that it's better to show.
What can the people expect on your retreats?
Well, many things. I try to structure the retreats around plant medicine. Not always plant, we call them spirit teachers. They can come from the vegetal, the fungal, or even sometimes the animal kingdom. And having been trained in various different, let's say, spiritual techniques, some that come from shamanic traditions. The shamanic traditions not necessarily have a canonical scripture. That is what basically divides shamanism and religion. As I see it, religions are schools of prayer. They teach us how to pray, and they have also different techniques that in some way they evolved from shamanism. So we can encounter various of these different techniques, but I center everything around spirit teachers, because I have found that it's the way that people respond best to retreats today. We don't have the time as we could have had in other ages, in which we could go to a monastery and do month-long retreats. People nowadays need ways to be in contact with nature that doesn't necessarily ask of them to renounce their life, and this is something important. Shamanism and these retreats do not ask you to change your life, to change who you are, to change your name. They don't even ask you to change your belief. You know, we're not trying to change anyone's belief. I have nothing to sell and no ideology to proselytize, if we can say. So I try to structure the retreats around healing and basically around these particular teachers. In the Americas, particularly the Andean Amazonian traditions that I've inherited, the trinity of medicines is that composed of a sacred family, the mother being ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is, we could say, the most powerful, the most present, and the most holy and important of all the plants in the Amazon basin. And she's considered to be the mother because it's a very receptive journey with a feminine spirit that asks of us introspection, to look inside and find how to deal with our own selves. Then Huachuma is a cactus that comes from the Andes, the mountains being the more masculine compared to valley mountain duality. And this medicine is more of a teacher that inspires respect, and instead of teaching us to deal with ourselves, has more to do with how to deal with the world. So Huachuma is considered to be the father, and in this sacred family, the children are the androgynous beings of the mushroom. The mushroom does not necessarily reproduce itself through sexuality, so it's not considered to be, well, it's androgynous. And these medicines are the main ones that we use, predominantly ayahuasca. I make a very strong foothold about ayahuasca. It is the one that should always be done first, and it's the one that opens the gateway for the other ones. However, though the nucleus are these medicines, we also practice various other different techniques and ways to maintain our health. Health is not just what we do. For example, meditation, cold baths, connection with nature, the river, the forest, whatever we are, whether the mountains, the desert. But also how to live implies, what we eat, how we move. So it's not just that we are constantly meditating. Meditating is a way in which we train our minds. We also need to train our energy, and to do this we sing and we practice mantras of different traditions. And to maintain the physical health, we have different schools of movement. Yoga is a very important one, but there are many schools of yoga, and at some points even calisthenics. It comes to touch yoga in some senses. So movement of the body is very important, and also it's very important what we eat. And I don't really have any particular teaching regarding nutrition. My only suggestion is to eat always local, to respond to the dietary resources of the land. And particularly when we're talking about plant medicine, it's always best to do the diet from the place that this plant comes. So the diet varies, and we learn a lot about our body, how to keep our energy vibrating correctly, and how to keep our mind empty of illusion, just to live a healthy, more natural and connected life.
The idea about energy and vibration within your body, you vibrating as a being, is distant for many people. Can you tell us something a little bit more about that idea?
Yeah. It's distance maybe from an intellectual perspective, but there are many ways in which we can understand it to be something that we live with. For example, to the more mystically inclined people, I could say that taking the point of view of astrology, every planet is a living being, and every planet has a resonance. Okay, this vibration that the planet has, vibration is music. So when we are born, what is it that our natal chart is telling us? It's telling us the structure of the universe, or particularly of our solar system, and it is also telling us the particular note the solar system was doing in the moment we were born. And this particular note is the note that we have come to manifest. And sometimes we go against this vibration. We go against our natural music, and it happens that a lot of, not just religions, but paths and ideologies, everyone wants every person to ring the same, and this goes completely against the gift of our own diversity, the spectrum of our talents. And from a perspective that is less mystically inclined, but we can understand it perfectly, I don't have a bowl with me now, but there are some instruments that resonate, that do some drones. So for example, I can hit a bowl and it will do, and its resonance will be fluid, its cadency will be perfect. Now let's say that we bring an object into contact with this bowl, and as the bowl is touching it, when we hit it, the resonance will be distorted. It will do like zzz. So there's an obstacle here that is limiting the natural expression of this bowl. And when we speak about healing, we're not trying to change anyone. Everyone is perfect. The only perspective that I can see and understand healing by is to take out that which does not belong to us. So in this case, when a person is depressed, when a person is anxious, when a person has peaks of personality, he doesn't find himself or herself, what I see is that there are external factors that are conditioning its own vibration. And through healing, which is actually taking out these foreign elements that impede its proper functioning, we can learn to recognize our own music and vibrate naturally. Sometimes I make an effort to give people the encouragement to sing. In shamanism and in the mystical traditions that use the voice, it's not really important to sing in an expressive manner. It's important just to vibrate, and everyone can do this. You know, everyone can do this. You don't need a good voice. You just have to open your mouth and to have this experience, to be able of producing this empty sound is something that we make, that I make an effort for people to achieve, and that they might take this experience from a retreat. And when we find that our energy is vibration and that we resonate in the quality that we were meant to, we can abandon all ideas and all intellectualism and all academic interpretation of what we are meant to be, and we just ring.
And that's when we have our most balanced life?
I feel that that's when we are happier. When I grab an instrument and the instrument, sounds good, the instrument is happy. And when the instrument is coerced into sounding in a way that it doesn't want to, it's unhappy. But unhappiness is just this, and happiness, I think that it comes in its many ways, from depression to anxiety and all the manifestations that it can have. In a way, it is warning. We shouldn't even be against disease. Disease is warning. It's telling us, hey, you are not living in a way. I don't want to say that you're supposed to, because the word supposed, it implies a should state. We're not talking about a should state. We're not trying to convince anyone. But what I have found is that the more that we put our hands in the earth and the more we live connected to it, the more our physical, psychic, and spiritual organism resonates with a natural sense of bliss. I'm not talking necessarily about pleasure. Pleasure always has its own shadow, and we try to avoid pain by getting pleasure, and we find that is impossible. There are ways to neglect pleasure in order to neglect pain. One can do this. One can go to a monastery and be alone, and eventually, the karmic coagulations and the traumas will subside. But one has to neglect. It's a path of renunciation. It's a path of monasticism that I don't find that it's the best path for people today. However, there's also a path in which we can go directly to pleasure and directly to pain and use both for our spiritual evolution. Some people think that the path of shamanism is an easy path, that it's very easy to take plant medicine and to voyage into other realms, and people think that these are illusions and it's sort of a fake spirituality. And everyone that says this has not done any of this, because if they would, they would know that it's a very difficult path, that one has to confront their own fears, their own pain. And by going directly to the pain, not by avoiding it, we receive a greater deal of pleasure. But this non-dual pleasure, this pleasure that has eaten its own shadow, is bliss. And this bliss is like finding the principle of happiness. If you find the principle of happiness, you can be happy anywhere.
And when you find this pain and you go to that place, do you release it then? Do you release that trauma? What happens to it?
That's a very good question. Of course, the ideal is for us to release that pain, to release that trauma. Now, speaking directly of trauma, we have to understand that we cannot do it ourselves, because we are the very person who hid that trauma in the first place. It's as if we had thrown a key away. It's as if something had happened to us and we lifted the rug and hid it. It's as if we had buried this pain. And the mind does not want to remember. The mind is actually blocked to it. The heart will always remember it. And since we are identifying ourselves with our mind, the mind will always refuse to go to this trauma. It is impossible for a person to delve into his or her own trauma by themselves. I have never seen it.
But what about those people who go to psychiatrists and hypnotherapy to get rid of that trauma, that pain? Is that enough, or do they need also, if they aren't managing to release it, to think about shamanism as an option?
Yes, it's a good question. I mean, from psychiatrists to psychologists and any other therapies, we are receiving help. We are receiving help. So I'm not saying that psychology cannot help to liberate trauma. I'm not saying that psychiatry cannot help how to liberate trauma. However, in the view of shamanism, these are very early schools. These are schools that have not been as thoroughly tested, which is very funny because contemporary culture demands of shamanism some tests to prove itself. Whereas shamanism has tested its efficiency for the past 10,000 years, and psychology has less than 100, or 120 if we consider the beginning with Freud's On Dreams. But how I see it, psychology is a path, let's call it a vehicle. In Buddhism, they do this also. We can speak about different vehicles, and we speak of different vehicles because some are slower and some are faster. Now, if you drive a slow vehicle, the risk is lesser, but also it takes you a long time to get to the point of destination. Now, if you drive a faster vehicle, you get quicker to the point of destination, but you have to know how to drive very carefully. So if you drive a car, well, it takes you some time to get to the top of the mountain. If you drive a helicopter, you can do it very easy. However, you better know how to drive a helicopter, or you better have a very good driver. So when we're talking about plant medicine, it's not even that plant medicine heals us. We shouldn't make the mistake of taking them as pills. People nowadays think that a pill cures us, but what I see from the psychiatric point of view is that pills only attack the symptoms, but they cannot cure the original problem. People are left in a stasis. If we really want to evolve from that state, we need to go to the origin of the problem. Now, to go to the origin of the problem, we need first external help in human form. We also need a catalyst. The catalyst can be anything from, holotropic breath work to using plant medicine or fungal medicine or these spirit teachers. However, the important thing is the practitioner. When people ask me, Juan, should I do this? Should I do that? People are not really in a position where they can decide what they should do. This would be as ridiculous as having a person that is sick to decide whether he needs an echogram or an encephalopathy, something like this. We really need to go to the doctor, and in this case, the doctor is the shaman, and provide him with our clinical, psychological, and spiritual history, and allow him to decide what is the best thing for us, because we can't decide something that we don't know. So when people ask me, Juan, what I should do, my answer is always the same. What you should do is you should trust the practitioner to which you convey or at least present your soul to. Whenever we're talking about psychological problems, we allow the other person to have a gate to our nature. And if we don't trust this person, and if this person is not trustworthy, we can, it's like getting into a helicopter with someone that doesn't know how to drive. It can be problematic. So it's not that important what therapy we use. What is important is the therapist. In the case of shamanism, what I found is that the therapist is supreme, because the therapist is not the shaman, is the medicine. And the medicine is the greatest healer of them all. However, it requires of a shaman to be used as a prism of its magic. And this shaman, that can be a man or it can be a woman, of course, or it can be, could be anything really. The shaman is merely a vessel of this magic. But it's not really the shaman that heals you, and again, it's not really the medicine that heals you, both the medicine and the shaman combine themselves to provide a context through which a person can confront their own traumas, and by seeing them, truly, we can liberate them. Whatever we liberate is because we have aimed our presence to it, and whatever we have unliberated is because we have withdrawn our presence from it. So if there is a place in our psyche that's a dark place that we just throw the things that we don't want to see, this darkness will radiate things that we ignore. For example, we can find ourselves having reactive emotions of anger, peaks of depression, anxiety, and we say, how is it that I can't control this attitude? Where is it coming from? Well, it's coming from a place that you don't want to see because we buried it in the first place. That's why we need help. That's why we need a technique to do it with. And that's why we need to rely on trustworthy people that we also trust. Because trust is a two-way street. It's not just that the shaman should be trustworthy. We also need to trust the shaman. And the shaman needs to trust us because it's, again, it's a two-way street. So one must enter this path with a huge deal of faith, with a huge deal of humility, but also with a huge deal of caution.
Why caution?
Well, there are, for example, if we speak about lineages that do a lot to preserve their legitimacy, for example, it comes to mind Tibetan Buddhism. No, in Tibetan Buddhism, if you have a teacher, a guru, a brahmacharya, a rinpoche, you know who was his teacher, and you know who was his teacher, and all that way up to Padmasambhava, Tilopa, or whomever was the founder of that lineage. Now, the interesting thing is that this can only happen through keeping registry. And the difference between shamanism and religion is that religion supports itself through scripture, through writing. Now, shamanism is learning how to read the book of nature. That is why shamanism renounces any sort of legitimization, any sort of canonization, any sort of explanation. And by the way, if you read any person telling you what shamanism is, don't trust them. There's no way of saying what shamanism is. Everyone needs to see it for him or herself. It's important that some people provide their own vision, but eventually that vision must be your own. Anyone who wishes to canonize shamanism is doing it a great disservice, or is pretending to found a new religion, of which we honestly need no more. But the problem is that with shamanism, since it has this huge power, that it aims to read the book of nature and that renounces completely any sort of scripture canonization and legitimacy of their traditions, we also find it very hard to know what is a legitimate shaman from who is not a legitimate shaman. And it's very easy to, well, it's not easy, but there are people that will pretend to be shaman for money, for fame, for power, and out of these, the lesser of them is money. The least worst thing that could happen is for you to lose a couple $100 if you go to a person that is not a shaman. Problems could be much worse. Of course, these people that abuse this path and that see it as an ego trip, they don't last too long. But what they can do is that they can bring a bad repute to shamanism. And this is a problem nowadays that we face. So since shamanism doesn't have a way of legitimizing correctly these people, what we need to do, well, there are ways, but these ways only a shaman knows, of course. There are ways to know if a shaman should have done long diets in reclusion and solitary retreat. There are some aspects that we know. But for lay people, the most important thing is to develop a link of trust and to know that the person that is doing this, the shaman, does not do it for money, fame, or power, but does it because he or she is a servant and is just doing what he or she has to,
I'm glad you brought that up because whoever Googles shaman or shamanic retreats or healing, is bombarded by a slew of information, both negative and positive, about what shamanism is, experiences that people have had. So what I'm hearing from you is people should be diligent and they should research a little bit. And in my own experience, I can say that when you give yourself over to spirit or a higher source, however you want to name that, you will be led to the path that is right for you. Nonetheless, you need to be cautious and do a little investigation work along the way.
Yes, totally. You should always test the shaman, test whatever practitioner. You know, you do from a Tibetan Buddhist Rinpoche to the lesser of the practitioner of the mystic arts. You should always first test them, then listen to them, and then, you know, put yourself into their hands once you've done this. But there should always be a testing. However, regarding, I mean, it's important to do some investigation, but in the end, it's not an intellectual switch what does the decision. Is something that the heart tells you, go through this way, this path. If one is seeking to understand these practices from ayahuasca to even mantras through reading or informing oneself, one will not get any deal of knowledge. I suggest to begin with baby steps, and any shaman of any sense of repute or who understands what he or she is doing will offer you an opportunity to have a private encounter before coming to a ceremony. If you directly, you know, pay and go at night and have a ceremony and you've had no contact with a shaman, it's very hard to trust them fully, which is a requirement in ceremonies, because you're falling into yourself, you're falling into this void, and you need someone to be an anchor to you in that reality, because if you can get lost. So it's very important that both shaman and people give themselves the chance to meet without judgment. Shaman are people too. The more we idolize and idealize the shaman, the more we'll be disappointed, because shaman are people, and we don't need to idealize them, neither create an iconoclasticism out of the shaman. Shaman are instruments of the medicines that they carry, and they are required to be full empty vessels in the ceremony. And in ceremony they become somewhat of they invoke the god or the spirit through them. But it's important also not to consider the shaman
A super being.
a super being, because that's where problems appear. Both people that could follow a shaman and have this idealization can bring themselves to disillusion, and can also allow themselves to be abused by putting a person that could have been very honest and very good in a position which he or she couldn't manage. And I've seen this a lot, particularly in the Amazon basin, or very humble indigenous people that a bunch of Westerners came and saw them as gods, and they put them in a position that they weren't able to deal with, and they themselves began making mistakes. And we fall again into this guru-disciple duality that, whether it worked for the past 2,000 years or not, we could say or not, I think it works when it's done correctly. But whether it is the proper way to bring on the new eon, I'm not sure. I feel that we need to abandon the idea of a particular savior, and we need instead to see each other from an emptiness of perspective. Whenever we consider the shaman to be a super being, we are creating our own downfall, and in a way we could also be creating that shaman's downfall too. So we have to be very careful with this. Whom we bow to is the medicine, whom towards which we have this feeling of devotion is the empty center in which no one can sit. Maybe an enlightened being, maybe a Buddha, maybe a Christ. Okay, they can be in the middle. But it's better not to consider ourselves to be anything else. So it's better for all of us to take our place in the circumference, and for everyone just to bow to the center, to bow to the medicines, to bow to God, to bow to nature, to bow to whatever name we use to call the divine, the pure, the absolute, the supreme source. It doesn't matter the name. It doesn't matter at all. What matters is that nobody tries to usurp it. And that whomever speaks, may the supreme source speak through them. But if this person, even if this person truly channeled supreme source, even if this person attaches himself to this and begins saying, oh, I am supreme source. Everyone is supreme source, but I know it.
That should be a warning flag.
Yes, that should definitely be a warning flag. I've never seen good results after this.
Good. Juan, I know you have to get ready and prepare for the retreat tonight, so I want to thank you.
Thank you so much.
And we look forward to seeing more of your information and healing work. Thank you.
Thank you. If this message finds good ears and there are any other questions that need to be satisfied, I am here to serve.